Hey, what's up? Hope you're doing good. So, we're going to do something a little different again today. I had this idea where, well, it's clear from the description what this is about, but in general, I want to look at the condition of the people's money in America in general from 1980 to the 2030. So we're going to look at 50 years in a row if we can, if I don't get tired or something. And in kind of a general way, using mundane astrology, we're going to look at Washington, D.C., and we're only going to look at Aries charts. And if you know about mundane astrology, you know that makes a few assumptions. The charts will change depending on the rising sign. So it's sort of an oversimplification because it doesn't include all of the data, but and Washington, like the only erecting the chart for Washington oversimplifies the rest of the United States. But I do think that there's a wealth of insight anyway. So and it really, like, when I was looking through it, it really makes a lot of sense. And I'm no historian. I don't really know what happened in the 80s. But I get this general sense that in the 80s it was pretty easy to like just if you worked you got money, right? That's kind of the general idea, and I think a lot of the so-called boomer generation, they grew up in the 80s, right? They came of age in the 80s, and I think, not to over put anybody out, but a lot of them kind of live there in their minds, as if it was still that way. But we can just demonstrate kind of why, or just kind of looking at the condition of the second house. Now, why are we doing that? So the second house, so the first house indicates the people, and so does the moon. The moon and the first house indicate the condition of the people in general in the nation. And the second house indicates the aid, so to speak, the assistance, what the people have to support them. Like, what do people actually have? Like, what's the condition of the people in general's wealth? And that's what the second house can tell us in mundane astrology. So I don't have any of these charts saved, so I gotta erect them all. But we'll just take a look. So, we'll start here at 1980. And I'll remind you, I do not know history. I'm not particularly interested in history, which is strange, I guess. But I do like that mundane astrology is accurate. But let's just take a look. So if we erect it, and I just use quadrant houses, I assume that the rulership depends on the ascendant, and then the 30 degrees is the correct house system, and it might not be. I was actually looking at porphyry houses recently, and those are kind of interesting that I know how they work, but I'm not sure that is the correct thing. Like with porphyry houses, you use the MC as well, and you draw the ascendant to the IC. You divide that up into three houses, and then the IC to the descendant, three houses, equally divided, and so on as well, with like the direction from the DC to the MC. But if you already understand that, I mean, I'm not saying anything new. But it's interesting. I don't really know if that is the correct house system or not. So before we do something so grand, I like to thank God, who gives wisdom and understanding, and I pray that He will let us understand and give us wisdom to look into these mysteries to the glory of His name. Jesus' name, amen. So we're just going to make all those assumptions, for better or worse, and that is the way we're going to do it. So we have the second house here ruled by Mars. Mars is retrograde in the fifth house in Leo, at the end of Leo. So Mars and the Sun are in a mutual reception, so they gain dignities. What that means is that even though that Mars is peregrine in Leo in general, having no particular dignities, he is uplifted by that mutual reception that's ruling the second house, and the Venus is in the second house in her own domicile with the moon indicating the people. The people are also indicated by Jupiter, by the first house being Pisces. Jupiter is in his fall in Virgo, but Mercury is in Pisces, so Mercury and Jupiter are in a mutual reception. So both of those mitigating conditions contribute to buoying up the condition of the second house. 1981. And I kind of just want you to see in general that like the money was much simpler in the 80s. The second house condition is not weird. It gets really, like, starting in the 90s, we're going to see it starts to get a little bit more weird, and then going through the 2000s, it's all messed up. 2010s, and then 2020 and 2022 specifically are very bad. We're going to get to that. But if this is all you watch of the video, I want you to know that after 2022, like from 2023 to 2020 or 2030, it's not bad. It's not the worst. It's like kind of not everybody right now in our moment like kind of wants to think that there is no future, or that like you should give into this hopelessness that they want you to feel. I don't think so. I mean, you got to just survive these next couple years, and then work, and then your money will be there, right? Like the 80s, maybe not quite like the 80s. We're gonna take a look, but anyway, so we got 1981 here. The sun is in Aries, obviously, ruling the second house, with the domicile ruler Mars also co-present. And having the domicile ruler in the same sign is generally good. So I mean that indicates like if the second house is ruled by the sun and the sun is in a generally good condition, that's pretty good. But at the same time, the second house ruler is afflicting Mars by being so close under the beams. Venus is also under the beams. But we're really only looking at the second house right now. So really all we can say about it is that, it's really not in a great condition, but it's not a terrible condition either, and it's pretty simple looking as well. We're going to move on. All right, so the second house is in Libra. That means that this is 1982 now. The second house, Libra, Venus is in Aquarius, ruled by Saturn, who's in Libra. So Venus and Saturn mutually receive and they mitigate conditions. In that case, Saturn is exalted in Libra. But, you see, and the moon is applying, let's see, what's the next aspect of the moon? Square to Jupiter. So, I mean, if we're talking about the people, which we probably shouldn't to make this video a little shorter, yeah, we can't get into that. We're only going to talk about the second house. Yeah, so I mean, the second house ruler is in a mutual reception. That really does help a lot with the second house, because mutual receptions mitigate adversity. All right. (1983). Sagittarius rising with Jupiter on the ascendant. I mean, that's good for the people. The moon doesn't look particularly afflicted in this chart. Good for the people. Second house ruled by Saturn. Saturn is in Scorpio and Mars is in Aries. So at least the domicile ruler of the house of the second house ruler is in domicile. So probably, this was like more of a strict time. I would say I think like from a little history I know, I think like the 1980 through 1983 period was like pretty like economically like there was a recession going on, but and that kind of shows up here. And I think when we go to 1984 and onward, it's gonna change considerably. Okay, so we have 1984, we have Pisces rising. 1984, and people are superstitious about that year. I mean, for interesting reasons, I guess. Venus in Pisces. The second house ruler is Mars through Aries. Mars is in domicile in Scorpio, so the second house ruler is in domicile. That is great for the condition of the second house. And we see that he's in a trine to the sun, who's in the first house. So I mean, the people's condition in general is good, and so is the money condition. That looks like spending, really. I mean, people are willing to spend at that time, and that also has meaning for like if the people have any money or not. So we move to 1985, and the second house ruler is the sun. The sun is in Aries, Mars is in Taurus, and Venus is in Aries in a mutual reception. So the ruler of Aries, the ruler of the second house, the sun, he's in a house that is ruled by mutual reception, which is fine. I mean, that really, even though Venus is retrograde in this chart, it really goes a long way to make the condition of the second house a lot better. In 1986, we have the second house ruled by Venus. Venus is in Aries. The ruler of Venus, Mars, is in Sagittarius. The ruler of Sagittarius is in Pisces, Jupiter. So we have a benefic ultimately ruling the chain of the second house. So even though Mars and Venus are peregrine, they don't have a particular dignity, or they're being ruled by a planet in domicile, a benefic planet in domicile. So that is a good thing. And the second house ruler themselves is not in a hard angle, and trining the midheaven, or sextiling the midheaven. So probably this was a very prosperous year for the people. In 1987, the second house was ruled by Jupiter through Sagittarius. Jupiter is in Aries. The ruler of Jupiter, Mars, is in Taurus, ruled by the Venus in Aquarius, who is ruled by Saturn in Sagittarius, who's ruled by Jupiter, right? So we have this mutual, I don't know what this is called, but it comes up a lot, actually, where you have 3, 4, or even 5 planets doing this musical chairs kind of deal here. And I don't know. I need to actually find that in the literature, but I'm just going to assume that it works like a mutual reception. Could be wrong about that, but I mean, having planets mutually receive each other even on that level, I think is more complicated. But you're gonna have to consider the conditions of the planets like during that year to kind of see like what things are going wrong with that. But it is better than having a worse condition. What else can we say about 1987? Jupiter is not in a bad condition, really. He's not really afflicted. And his ruler, Mars, is in a square to its own ruler, so I mean, that's not good. And then Venus is in a sextile to its rulers, which is good. So, I mean, I don't know. 1987 looks like an interesting year. I wonder what actually happened that year. Makes me one of those that I actually like to look at historically. In 1988, we have Pisces rising, or Aquarius rising, so the second house was ruled by Pisces, which is Jupiter. Jupiter is in Taurus, co-present with the ruler of the sign Venus and the moon. So, I mean, this looks awesome for the second house. The North Node is right in the second house, so I mean, people are really focused on accumulating wealth in a way. And the Sun in the second house, like, entails people were very much spending their money during this year. In 1989, we have the second house ruled by the moon. The moon is in Virgo. The condition of the ruler of Virgo is Mercury, who's in Pisces, which is Mercury's fall. But Jupiter is in Gemini. So Mercury and Jupiter mutually receive and mitigate conditions. And if that is the ruler of the moon, the second house condition is not terrible. And it's in a trine to Jupiter. So, I mean, there's probably more of a serious tone to finances, or money specifically, not finances, during that year. And I think that was kind of, 1989 kind of marked the end of, that period of the 80s where things were a certain way. 1990, so we have the second house ruled by Libra, which is Venus. Venus is in Aquarius. Saturn is in Capricorn. So we have Capricorn, the planet Saturn in domicile ruling the chain that is not like indicating the second house. So I mean, this doesn't look bad. It doesn't look as good for the second house, does it? I mean, Saturn in Capricorn is a serious, overly pessimistic planet configuration to have. So, I mean, a very serious tone probably came in at this time. People were probably more conservative about their money. In 1991, the second house was ruled by Sagittarius. That means that Jupiter in Leo was the ruler. Jupiter in Leo is ruled by the Sun in Aries, pointing us to Mars in the 8th house in Gemini, which points us back to Mercury in Aries. So actually we have a mutual reception of Mercury and Mars dominating this chain. And that's a little bit more confusing. I think having Jupiter retrograde there, is an affliction for sure, but it's ultimately held up by a pair of mutually received planets. So, I mean, that's good, but I mean, it's not great. I mean, it's not as good as the 80s, you can tell. And it doesn't get better, really. So let's take a look. 1992. So we have the second house. Venus in Pisces is in the second house. It's an Aquarius rising chart. I mean, the Venus in Pisces, that's great to be in the second house. But that second house is ruled by Jupiter in fall in the 8th house in Virgo, which points us to Mercury, who's in Aries retrograde in the 3rd house, pointing us to Mars in Aquarius and back to Saturn. So this kind of gives us a lot of conflicting indications, because you could consider Venus to be an exaltation ruler of Pisces, and then that would bada bing bada boom, be good for your second house. But because the domicile ruler is in such a difficult position without really any support, probably was a more austere time. 1993. The second house ruled by the moon, where Mars is. The moon is in Pisces. The ruler of the moon is retrograde in Libra. The ruler of Libra is retrograde in Aries. The ruler of Aries is Mars in the second house. So this does not look good for the second house, even though you can see that we have a mutually received system here. You know, having having so many afflicted planets in the chain does not help. You know, Mars is in fall, Jupiter's retrograde, Venus is also retrograde. Yeah, we're gonna kind of pass over that one because I mean I don't really know how to go deep into that. Really, I wish I did. I will someday know my chops even better. So in the second house here we have Virgo ruling the second house, indicating Mercury in Pisces, indicating Jupiter in Scorpio. So we go back to Mars, who's making a trine to Jupiter in Scorpio. So actually Jupiter and Mars receive in this chart, so I mean that's good. So Mars, Jupiter mutual reception, leading us back to Mercury. Like I said, but the thing is, Mercury is still in fall, though. Even though Mercury is upheld by this mutual reception, he's applying to Saturn, and which is a restrictive cold influence, and he's also in fall. So good, you know, a weird good thing holding it up, but you know, it's complicated, right? Like look, like comparing it to the 80s, it's like not simple. All right, so but in 1995, look at this. We have Jupiter in his domicile ruling the second house, and that's it. Like we do not have another, you know, thing to look for the second house here. It's pretty done deal. So I think for some reason 1995 was at least pretty good on the money front. For some reason. Well, this is the reason. I don't really know how it played out. But we have Mars there making the trine to it. So I mean, Mars indicating the government. Somehow the government very much or the sort of like a Mars in the 10th house is like a not a very nice government, making an easy aspect to that. So I mean, I wonder how that actually played out. 1996. The second house was ruled by Aquarius, indicating Saturn in Pisces, which we want to look to Jupiter in Capricorn. So we have a mutual reception of Jupiter in the 12th house and Saturn in the 3rd house, with Saturn being the ruler of the second house there. So I mean, probably, you know, it probably mitigated a lot of conditions there. That was probably a pretty good time, even though, you know, it's not like Jupiter in the second house. It's Saturn ruling the second house, right? So I mean, more of an austere attitude towards money, but probably in general there was the money was pretty good. (1997). So we have the second house ruled by the moon, who's void of course in Leo. The sun is in Aries, indicating Mars in Virgo, which goes back to Mercury in Aries. So we have a Mercury-Mars mutual reception here with Mercury conjunct Saturn. So I mean, having a restraining influence on the whole thing. And on the moon. So the moon is not in a good condition here, so we wouldn't expect the people's money to be good here. 1998. The second house was indicated by Virgo, ruled by Virgo. That is Mercury conjunct Saturn in Aries yet again, but with Mars also co-present. So actually you have a classical besiegement of Mercury by Mars and Saturn. So probably for some reason this was a pretty hellish year as far as the people's money is concerned. Even though, well, no, you don't have a mutual reception. I mean, the domicile lord is there, and that's pretty much cut and dry. I wonder what happened in 1998. You can look all that up, I suppose. Maybe you are interested in history more than me. 1999. The second house was indicated, ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter in Aries, Mars in his domicile, retrograde, stationary. Mars must be stationing, getting ready to retrograde in this chart, looking at the position of the Sun. So that Jupiter is ruled by a stationary Mars in the first house, so that doesn't bode well for the second house. And that's where we're going to leave it. So 2000. In 2000, the second house was indicated by Aquarius. So we want to look at Saturn. Saturn is in Taurus, ruled by Venus in Pisces, ruled by Jupiter in Taurus. And now this is a pretty interesting chart because it's not actually, you want to have the malefic. you want to have the malefics within 9 degrees to have a classical besiegement. So this Jupiter isn't actually besieged, I think, and he's in a mutual reception with Venus in Pisces. So if the second house was indicated by Saturn, who's being ruled by Venus in Pisces in this mutual reception, I think it's almost like begrudgingly things were good, or like the money was good. So in 2001, the second house was indicated by Mercury, or Gemini, with Mercury in Pisces. So we want to look at Jupiter here, who's in Gemini. So we have a mutual reception of Mercury and Jupiter, who are in a square. So, they're in a mutual reception, but they're making an aspect. And so, that was probably actually a pretty decent year, all told, as far as the people's money. In 2002, the second house was ruled by Virgo, so we want to look at Mercury in Pisces and the Jupiter in Cancer. So Jupiter in Cancer is ruled by the moon, so we want to look at the moon in Gemini. So I think we have an interesting chain of planets here of moon, Jupiter, Mercury, and then Mercury ruling Saturn. I don't think that matters for this what we're talking about. No, it doesn't. The moon is in a square to Mercury. So I think it's it's very similar themes to like the previous year are there. Jupiter in Pisces is exalted. So you have an exalted Jupiter in the 11th house. That's Jupiter in its own joy and exalted, ruling Mercury, who is in fall, but ruling the second house. So, probably, it's Mercury in Pisces is a very confusing situation, but it's being upheld very strongly. So, in 2003, we had the Scorpio indicating this, ruling the second house, with the South Node in the South Node in Sagittarius in the second house. So we want to look to Mars. Mars is in Capricorn, where he's exalted. Saturn is in Gemini, ruled by Mercury in Pisces, and that Mercury in Pisces is being ruled by the Sun in Leo, and the Sun in Leo is being ruled by Mars in Capricorn. So what does that look like? So look at that. What is that? What do you even call that? I don't know. I don't know if that's good or bad. I think it'd be kind of interesting to look at some of that historically and kind of like what 2003 was like, because I mean that's kind of insane in my opinion to have like 5 planets mutually receiving in a chain like that. That's kind of confusing. I don't really know what to make of that, because Mars in Capricorn is exalted, right? And then you have the ruler Saturn in Gemini, right, which is a peregrine for or no particular dignity for Saturn. What's more, the ruler of that Saturn is Mercury in Pisces, who's combust the Sun. So I mean, it's a pretty weak link in the chain there, for pretty much all contexts. I was very young during 2003. I don't really know how it was, but it's definitely weird. That's all I know it's a terrible delineation, but it's weird. 2003 was weird. I guess if we want to talk about the condition of the second house specifically, though, I mean, ruled, well, I mean, you have some strong links in the chain and some peregrine links, and then a very weak link, Mercury in Pisces, without, any explicit mutual reception, sort of mitigating that. I don't know what to think about 5 planets doing that. I really don't. So in 2004, you have the second house ruled by Saturn through Aquarius. Saturn is in Cancer, ruled by the Moon in Pisces, who is ruled by Jupiter in Virgo, who's ruled by Mars in Aries, who's ruled by or Mercury in Aries, ruled by Mars in Gemini. So actually you have a fairly long chain, but they're ruled by Mars is in Taurus here. That's Mars in Taurus, actually, ruled by Venus in Taurus. So this long chain is ruled by a planet in domicile, which is good. What was the second house ruler? Saturn. So I mean that is confusing. I mean, like, you get the second house ruler Saturn all the way down this chain from a planet in domicile. So I mean that is not simple. That is not a simple situation, I think. And if the Saturn was ruled by the fickleness of the Moon all year, and like a very dark moon, I don't see that as being very good for the second house. In 2005, you have the second house ruled by Mercury through Gemini. That Mercury is retrograde, stationary in Aries, indicating Mars in Capricorn, exalted, which indicates Saturn in Cancer, which indicates the Moon in Cancer. So the Moon in the anaretic degree of Cancer is dominating this whole chart. Oh, and you have Venus and Jupiter in a mutual reception in this chart as well. That's not relevant for us, but that's there. But yeah, that Mercury in Aries, that Mercury is highly afflicted. He's within 15 degrees of the sun, so I mean he's like technically under the beams, retrograde, peregrine, not awesome. And that Mars is in the anaretic degree of Capricorn. That's weird. And making his opposition to the Moon. Saturn is in Cancer here, retrograde, stationary, actually just starting to retrograde. So, I mean, you have several afflicted planets ruling the second house in this chart in 2005. You notice how it's not like the 80s. That's the main thrust of this video, I guess. I don't know. I've just been thinking about how it ain't the 80s anymore. You ain't in the 80s anymore. All right. Let's see. The second house in 2006 is ruled by Virgo. So we want to look to Mercury in Pisces, who is retrograde, moving away from the sun, under the beams of the sun. Again, we want to look at Jupiter in Scorpio there, who's also retrograde. He's just started his retrograde motion. So that also indicates, we want to look at Mars in Gemini. And then Mercury is ruling that. So we have another interesting chain here where we have Jupiter, Mercury, and Mars making a mutual reception, if you want to call it that. So I think in a way it's like upheld, but I mean, none of the planets that are in that threefold mutual reception are doing particularly well. Mercury in Pisces is in fall, Jupiter in Scorpio is peregrine and retrograde, and Mars there in Gemini is also peregrine. So I mean, that all adds up to not really a great condition for the second house. In 2007, the second house was ruled by Scorpio. So we want to look at Mars in Aquarius. That Mars in Aquarius is peregrine, having a particular dignity, and ruled by Saturn in Leo. So we want to look to the Sun. The Sun is ruled by Mars. So we have a system of Mars, Saturn ruling Mars, Mars ruling the Sun, and the Sun ruling Saturn, right? So we have, kind of a similar situation to 2006. Mars is directly indicating the second house. He's opposite his domicile ruler. So, I mean, a planet being opposite its own ruler, indicating the second house, is not good. And now we get to famous 2008. Very famous. Everybody knows about 2008. So we get to 2008. Make sure I exactly erect this here. 2008, you got the second house ruled by Capricorn. So we want to look at Saturn. Saturn is retrograde in Virgo, being ruled by Mercury in fall in Pisces, being ruled by Jupiter in Capricorn. So I mean, you got a planet in exile, Jupiter. You got another planet in exile, Mercury, and you've got a peregrine Saturn as well, all in that chain. So, I mean, you can read the writing on the wall right here if you know anything about 2008. Saturn is indicating that, and Saturn is highly afflicted and ruled by planets completely out of their own zone. So it's no surprise that 2008 worked out the way it did. In 2009, we have the second house ruled by Taurus, which leads us to Venus retrograde in Aries under the beams of the sun. So that's an affliction to the second house ruler. And then the ruler of Venus is in Pisces. So we want to look at Jupiter in Aquarius, which makes us want to look at Saturn in Virgo. So, like we've already talked about, and that's a planet in fall opposing a planet peregrine, indicating the second house. So, Not surprising that the fallout of the 2008 continued. All right, 2010. We're getting there. We're actually going to get through this. I'm happy about that. Because I want you to see like how bad, or like how good the 80s was, how kind of mediocre the 90s were, how kind of like wishy-washy the 2000s were, and then we're going to look at the 2010s, what they do, and then, the world kind of all goes to hell at 2020 and then 2022. But then you can see like what kind of happens after that. I think you will be happy about that. I don't know. I think you want to have money. I think. Pretty sure. So we want to look at the second house here of the Sun, or Leo, which is ruled by Mars. Mars is in Leo, I think. Yep. So we have a Mars-Sun mutual reception indicating the second house. So because there aren't any particular afflictions well, the Sun is opposing Saturn, so I mean, the Sun and Saturn are not friends, they're definitely enemies, and Saturn is exalted there. So I mean, you got an exalted retrograde Saturn. So it's a very cranky retrograde Saturn in his own exaltation, opposing the Sun in its exaltation in a mutual reception, which is all like in a trine sextile opposition thing. So I mean, that's a pretty strong counter indication, but I mean, it's like very much like an opposition to that. But I mean, it's strong. The second house is strong, but it's like strong. It's also strongly opposed as well. In 2011, we have the second house ruled by Mars in Pisces. I mean, the second house is ruled by Scorpio, which is indicated by Mars in Pisces. And that Mars in Pisces is pointing us to Jupiter and Aries. So we have a mutual reception between Jupiter and Mars ruling the second house. That's pretty good. Jupiter is being opposed by the moon, so I mean, the people are somehow not on board with that. And the people are also so close to that conjunction, leaving that conjunction to Saturn there. So I mean, there's another round of this sort of opposition to the people's aid coming from Saturn. In 2012, the proverbial end of the world, the second house was ruled by, that was a joke, Capricorn. And that Capricorn was ruled by Saturn exalted in retrograde in Libra. It's interesting how Saturn and Libra really played, Saturn and Virgo played such a role in the second house in these few years we just looked at. It's interesting. Well, the domicile ruler of that Saturn is Venus, leaving the conjunction to Jupiter in its own domicile, which I think is great. Or I mean, it's at least not bad, not terrible. I mean, to have a retrograde Saturn be the ruler of the second house is kind of, I mean, it speaks for itself. It's kind of probably pretty reticent to spend any money or to, it's like the money is strong, but I don't know, you don't really want an exalted planet to be ruling, or an exalted malefic planet to be ruling the second house. Really, I don't think. I think you would rather have something else. So in 2013, we have the second house ruled by Aries, indicating Mars in Aries. We got the south node in the second house as well. So I mean, there's like a gap there, even though it's a planet in its domicile ruling a house is usually good. Having a strong malefic, I'm not sure how good that actually was. I mean, it's like you have a certain type of good wealth, but I mean, it's characterized by Mars and Aries. In 2014, we have the second house ruled by the Sun. The Sun is in Aries. Mars is in Libra in exile or fall, I think. Yeah, and retrograde. Sorry, I forgot what I was doing. And then that ruler is Venus in Aquarius, who's ruled by Saturn in Scorpio. So, I mean, that looks bad to me. So, Venus, Saturn, Mars, mutual reception, ruling the Sun, who's indicating the second house. The Sun is in the ninth house, kind of hidden, cadent. I mean, it just doesn't really. It doesn't really look like the end of the world for the money situation, but it is afflicted. In 2015, you have the second house ruled by Libra. That Libra is ruled by Venus in her own domicile in the 8th house. So, I mean, it's like the people, like when I was looking at this earlier, I thought, okay, well, the money is like of a financial nature, or like of an inherited nature, primarily for the people, or they get it from, it's a very strong Venus in the 8th house. So, I mean, it's like a very strong financial moment, financial specifically. That's all I have to say about that. In 2016, you have, one sec. I'm losing my focus a little bit, but we are going to power through it. And hopefully I have enough data on my phone, or storage on my phone, to save this cut. In 2016, you have the second house indicated by Capricorn, which is Saturn stationary in Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter in his exile, and Virgo. And then you have Mercury in Pisces. So, I mean, you have a mutual reception between Saturn or Jupiter and Mercury ruling that the Sagittarius house. So, I mean, but that Saturn stationary is like in a T-square to both of those planets pretty much. So that onerous nature of Saturn kind of like, I don't know. I don't think Saturn handles that very well. And you got two planets in fall, mutually receiving each other. I mean, that is a dignity to have mutual reception, but I don't know how far that actually went. I don't think, I mean, it looks complicated. It looks difficult. And it looks like it doesn't go very far. It doesn't go anywhere. Like, if you have the stationary Saturn ruling the second house, I mean, that might have felt like a year where, like, things don't go anywhere. In 2017, you have the second house ruled by Aries, and Mars is in the second house, which indicates overspending. In Taurus, ruled by, or in a mutual reception with Venus retrograde under the beams. So that's pretty highly afflicted. But I mean, you do have this mitigating condition there that really holds it up. It's like overspending, but it's like held up in some weird way. in 2018, I know we're kind of whipping through these now, but 2018, you have the sun ruling the second house, and the sun is being squared by Mars, who's his own domicile ruler. Mars is in Capricorn, applying to Saturn, domicile. So, I mean, that is not a good condition for the second house. But, I mean, people do want to be accumulating wealth, it looks like. So, I mean, it's like people, it looks like overworking themselves to try to get that wealth in a large way, which, I mean, we're almost at the present now, so, I mean, it's kind of hitting home, I think. All right. So in 2019, we have the second house ruled by Libra, which is indicated by Venus in Aquarius, which is indicated by Saturn in Capricorn. So Saturn in Capricorn on the south node, trining Mars, I mean, for what that's worth. The sun, the one thing I want you to look at here is the moon here. I want you to think about 2019. Just for other reasons, not even just the second house reasons. If you're still with me here, I don't know how you could be. I don't know how, but you got a full moon in this chart. But the moon, I mean, the full moon is not a good aspect. And the moon is void of course, pretty close. And we're going to see that in the 2022 chart. The void of course moon being it's almost anaretic in this chart, and it is anaretic in the 2022 chart. But anyway, that's a peregrine Venus ruled by Saturn in domicile. So, I mean, like, I think the people's aid in this chart, I mean, it's trining, sextile to Jupiter in domicile. So, I mean, that's, like, okay. I mean, that's not, like, terrible, but I don't know, like the second house ruler doesn't really have any dignities, and it's ruled by Saturn in Capricorn, which is Saturn. I don't know, Saturn is like never a workable good planet. I don't know. So 2020, 2020. So 2020 we had, look how hellish this is. All right. Like, do you understand how bad 2020 is? I mean, you do. I mean, look, just the chart is actually just terrifying. All right, so you got a Scorpio rising. Second house is ruled by Jupiter in his fall, being besieged by the infortunes. Classically, that's within 9 degrees. I mean, if you advance the chart by like, I don't know how many hours it is, like Mars is like on an exact conjunction to Jupiter, so I mean, that is like Jupiter getting like driven into the ground by Mars there. And the second house, like the second house also has the south node in it, so I mean, it's just like and that besiegement of Jupiter is in the second house, so I mean, like everything about the second house in this chart is destroyed, The people do not have much in this chart. It's infamous. That's why people think that we will never go back to the pre-2020 world. No, we will. Don't worry. In a way, I mean, no, the past never comes back. The 80s are never coming back. But in a way, things do improve. All right, so 2021. You have Venus in Pisces in the second house. The sun is also in the second house, indicating spending. Venus is an exaltation ruler of Pisces, so I mean that's like good for like the people having things and like having some money. But Jupiter is in Aquarius in the 12th house in this chart, ruled by Saturn and his he rejoices in Aquarius. So having a very strong Saturn ruling Jupiter they're both in the 12th house. So I mean, very contraindicated there for like whether or not the people have any money. I don't think it's good to have Venus in the second house ruled by Jupiter in the 12th. I don't think that's good. All right, moving on. 2022, we're in the future now. If you're watching this in the future, hello. Hello from the past. All right, so we've got, almost there. We've got the second house ruled by the moon here. The moon is in the anaretic degree of Libra, and the ruler of Libra is being classically besieged by both planets. You got Mars in the 10th degree, Saturn in the 20th degree, so I mean like within about 10 or 11 degrees there. Venus is being besieged, so I mean it looks a lot like the 2020 chart. It really does. You just have the other benefic being besieged there. And the moon, I mean, is just in a terrible condition there, being like that. So 2020 is really the worst. I mean, like, just like we've looked at all of these. I mean, 2022 is just so bad for the people's money. Yeah, I mean, if we can talk more about like the specifics of like 2022 in my videos coming up, but I mean, it's not good. All right, I mean, you can just see it, like the second house ruled by that moon, who is void of course in the anaretic degree, not really particularly afflicted by any aspects, but the ruler of that house is being besieged, so it's not good. But it's not like it just keeps getting worse. The heavens wear out. Like the good Bible says that the heavens, will wear out like a garment, and that's true. That's true, but anyway. So we got the second house again ruled by Venus in 2023, but Venus here is on the North Node in the 8th house in her own domicile. So it's like another one of those years where like the people like somehow have this financial money. I don't know how, but maybe things are so hellish in 2022, like the stock market crash is so bad, like there is like an opportunity to like be financially, or like the money that people have like ends up coming from like these financial sources. Maybe you're not an investor. I'm not really an investor either, but like the money that people end up having has this financial nature, and it's very strong. And that's really all we need to say for 2023. 2024. 2024. Weird to say that. It feels weird. So the second house is ruled by Sag. Sag is ruled by Jupiter in Taurus, which is in a mutual reception and a sextile with Saturn, who is like, or with Venus, who is conjunct to Saturn. This is not a classical besiegement. It doesn't. I think it's a little bit too far away for that. But I mean, that looks pretty good. I mean, you got to work with the Saturn in 2024. But I mean, like Jupiter, like having Jupiter in Taurus in a mutual reception with Venus. I mean, that looks. I mean, that's things really turn a corner after 2022. So a lot of the idea of making this video is just kind of like, look, like it's gonna look pretty bad this next year. But don't lose hope. I mean, it's not hopeless. So in 2025, we have the second house ruled by Jupiter, who is in fall in Gemini, indicated by Mercury retrograde, not good. In Aries, indicated by Mars in exile, in Cancer, indicated by the moon, ruled by the moon in Sag. So like we have a chain of planets that looks like this. I'm losing my track right here a little bit. But I mean, it's like not the worst, but I mean Saturn is like on the north node in the second house. So I mean that probably people spend too much, things get austere again, right? So I mean moderation is the general wisdom, right? But I don't know. Anyway, 2025 isn't awesome. So in look at 2026. That's quite something there. So you got 2026. You've got Jupiter in the second house, in his exaltation in Cancer. What kind of messes that up, though, is that the moon is void of course, sort of in a square to Jupiter in Aries, and the ruler of that Aries is Mars in Pisces. So you got another chain of planets that looks like this, sort of upholding each other. I mean, it's not the worst. I really like to see that Jupiter is in Cancer there, because I mean, the people's aid will be really strong there because of that. I don't have enough mental energy to dive any deeper, but that's that. We're almost there. All right, in 2027, the second house is ruled by Virgo, which is indicated by Mercury in Pisces. That Mercury in Pisces is ruled by Jupiter retrograde in Leo, which is ruled by Sun in Aries, which points us to Mars retrograde in Leo. So I mean, you have a mutual reception of the Sun and Mars. I'm not saying it's good. Mars is in the 12th house retrograde. The Sun is in the 8th house. Saturn is also in the 8th house, making a trine to Jupiter. So I mean, it's complicated. That's not an easy thing to take apart. So the money definitely is not simple in 2027. In 2028, you see that we have the second house ruled by Sagittarius. I'm losing it. The second house is ruled by Jupiter in his fall, being mutually received by Mercury in Pisces. So I mean that's okay. And then you have the moon making a trine. I mean that's good for the people in general. So I mean this is not horrible. Not 2028. 2028 is not horrible in terms of money. Jupiter there is in the 11th house in his joy. But it is Jupiter in his fall being mutually received by the other planet in his fall, Mercury. So it's got its own bad problems. In 2029, the second house is ruled by Saturn in Aquarius, with Saturn in Taurus, taking us to Venus in the anaretic degree of Pisces. So you got exaltation ruler of Pisces there, in a chain there, and then look, you've got Jupiter retrograde in Libra there. So you've got Jupiter and Venus making a mutual reception, which is great because I mean Venus is like already in a good position pretty much. There's nothing really wrong with Venus there except that she's under the beams or almost combust there. It's kind of like the 2021 chart in that sense. It's different though. It's different. So I mean like that's not bad. It's not the worst. But if Saturn is ultimately dispositing the second house, you know, it will be like a sense of lack, or like a, well, that's too general. Like a you know, it's like good things in a way getting filtered through like a more restrictive lens, or a more restrictive mode of economy, or people's aid, not explicitly economy. And we come now to 2030, which is kind of a weird looking chart, I guess. I mean, you know, the ascendant is in the final degrees of Taurus, so we have the second house ruled by Gemini. That Mercury is in Aries, being ruled by Mars in his own domicile. So, I mean, this one's pretty cut and dry. The moon is opposing that, and that's like the bulk of the body of the second house. So, I mean, that's a pretty contraindicated. I mean, it's probably the money is kind of, you have to really go for it at this time. That's what people are kind of doing. They're enjoying that. But anyway, guys, I hope this was interesting for you. I hope you got to kind of see how good the '80s were, and like kind of like the mid 2000s were as well, and just how bad 2020 and 2022 are. But you know, 2023 is I can't really show you it again, but you know, 2023, like this decade is like not the worst. It's like it's not as bad as people are making it out to be. Like there's just not going to be anything. It's probably going to seem like that this next year, but it's not the end of the world. So, well, guys, if you stayed this long with me, God bless you. God bless you anyway. I hope that was helpful for you. I hope you got some insight out of that, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.